Today, I'm breaking down more sweet card designs from Lorwyn Eclipsed with an eye towards how they'll play out in Draft and Sealed, which is especially relevant because pre-releases are right around the corner. We're starting with Hovel Hurler, which is an absolutely stellar card. It's 3 red, white, so it's a hybrid mana card. It's a 6/7 giant warrior. When this creature enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it, so it kind of comes into play as a 5 mana 4/5 of sorts. But then it has hybrid red, red, white. Remove a counter from this creature. Another target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So for starters, you think of this card, you're like, okay, in a red-white deck, I can use this card, play it on turn 5, next turn, buff up 2 of my creatures to the sky, attack them with a 6/7 and 2 flyers, presumably do a giant chunk of damage or just end the game. So that's fantastic. The beauty of this card, and one of the reasons I like it so much, is not only because it's very powerful, but also because of how it fits into the format, because it's also the sort of card where if you have cards that put -1/-1 counters onto your creatures, like a Blight card, which is one of the mechanics in this set, or any other card that does that, you kind of want to put more -1/-1 counters onto Hovel Hurler, because then you can remove them and get value. And I think that's a really cool space to be in, because it just gives you, like, takes a downside and turns it into an upside if you have this card in your deck. It also plays well in other decks than you might think, because there is a multicolor deck in this format based around the Vivid mechanic, which cares about how many colors among permanents you control. And so if you're playing like a green-red deck that has a Hovel Hurler, then all of a sudden you're getting 2 different colors from your Hovel Hurler. So maybe when you play your payoff card, you have 2 extra, like you get an extra color from the white that maybe you don't have any other white cards in your deck, and all of a sudden you're getting Vivid for an extra number. So instead of getting Vivid for 3, you're getting Vivid for 4 or something like that. And I think that's really cool as well. So I think Hovel Hurler is a fantastic card and maybe has more homes and more synergies than you might first think. Next is Gnarlbark Elm. So 2 and a black for a 3/4 Treefolk Warlock. This creature enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it. Again, so it basically comes in as like a 2/3, or I mean 2 -1/-1. So it's like basically comes in as a 1/2, but it has 2 and a black, remove 2 counters from this creature. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So it comes in as a 1/2, but you get to remove those counters to presumably kill one of your opponent's small creatures, or maybe just shrink down a blocker for a turn. But this is another one of those cards where it's like, okay, if you just play this as a 1/2 and then eventually shrink something, that could be pretty good. But it's even better if you have ways to continually put -1/-1 counters onto your Gnarlbark Elm, so you're going to be consistently able to use its ability to shrink things, kill off a bunch of your opponent's small creatures. And I just love this sort of synergy to see on a card, because I just like cards that get amplified by good deck building and by using synergy. And I think Gnarlbark Elm is not only a tongue twister, but also a really cool card design and really strong in the right deck for Draft, and kind of just fine on its own as a standalone, which is generally good for card designs. Like going from fine to great is generally a good place to be, or solid to great. Next is Thought Weft Charge. This is a combat trick, which I don't normally highlight as pinnacles of design because they generally are pretty simple, but it's 1 and a green for an instant. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. If a creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. I thought this was really interesting because one of the general default states that you like to be in Limited and Draft or Sealed or any of these formats where combat tricks get played, because you don't really play combat tricks in Constructed, is that when you are playing a game of Limited, you want to leave your mana untapped during your first main phase if you're planning on attacking. Then you attack your opponent with as much mana available as possible so that you're representing as much as possible. So if you hold up 5 mana, you could be representing a bunch of different instants or flash spells or flash creatures or things like that. But if you tap some mana before, you're representing a much more limited number of things. And if you have Thought Weft Charge in your deck, you want to be playing things pre-combat because you want to have a creature enter the battlefield under your control so that you can draw the card when you cast Thought Weft Charge. But if you have Thought Weft Charge in your deck, does this then mean that you want to always play a creature pre-combat so your opponent thinks you might have the Thought Weft Charge? Because now all of a sudden we're getting into layers of mind games around this combat trick where your opponent's like, well, they've been playing a creature pre-combat the entire game, so they probably have Thought Weft Charge. But in reality, you don't have the Thought Weft Charge. Or if you just are always playing your stuff post-combat, and then one turn you play a creature pre-combat, your opponent's like, well, I know that they're a good player that plays their stuff post-combat. They're playing a creature pre-combat, so I think they have Thought Weft Charge. And then you start like doing that just to mess with your opponent and make them think you have Thought Weft Charge. Because it's a pretty big blowout if you give a creature +3/+3, it wins the combat, and you draw a card. So your opponent kind of wants to avoid that scenario. They don't want to let you use your Thought Weft Charge in that scenario. But then it's like, okay, do I always play a creature pre-combat? But that doesn't sound optimal because oftentimes you want to maybe represent other things during combat. And so it just leads to a bunch of whole mind games and shenanigans for one card. And I just love it. I think that's really, really cool. Next is Keeper. So it's 6 into white for a 3/3 elemental. It's one of the vivid cards that I was talking about for maybe this multi-color deck that like cares about having lots of different colored things. Hybrid mana symbols really do help with that. But it has vivid. When this creature enters, create X 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature tokens, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. Then tap 3 untapped creatures you control. This creature gets +3/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. So 7 mana for a 3/3 plus a 1/1, because if this is your white permanent, then you'll get like a 1/1. That's not a good card. You can often get that for like 4 mana in a set. 7 mana for 3/3 plus 2 1/1s isn't really a great card. So this card is like basically you want to get like at least 3, or maybe like kind of need to get like 4 1/1s, or have the ability to at some time get like 4 1/1s. And I think that's kind of a cool like perk of this card, because it's not going to get snapped up by the white decks. The only deck that's going to want this is this multicolor deck that's trying to get this sort of card late. And I think that's kind of a cool little place to be, unless there's like ways for like white decks to get like hybrid mana symbols. Like you may be playing like a white green deck, and then you have like one of like the blue green hybrid mana symbols in your deck, and you've got like the red white one hybrid mana symbol in your deck, and so you can maybe get this for like 4 or 5 colors even in a 2-color deck. That seems less likely to me than this being like a dedicated splash target for a vivid multicolor deck. And I think that's cool to include these in like the set, where you can maybe get this a little bit later for your multicolor deck, because normal white decks can't really use this. Whereas if you have the payoff in like only the dedicated like couple of colors that are dedicated to ramping, that's maybe a little bit like more commonly going to be able to like pick those cards up for just general good blue-green decks or something like that, because casting 7 drops in white decks isn't generally something you want to do. But then it's got the tap ability on it, so it can be kind of an aggressive finisher, and so I just think it has like a lot of cool things going on. Seems like a powerful card, and a lot of like interesting different like potential decks you could maybe try to fit this into. And also I just kind of like that you can maybe get this a little bit later for your like blue-green deck that wants to splash a couple white cards and get this card into your multicolored shell, and then it kind of finish the game. So I think it's a really nice, vivid design, good use of the space, especially because white isn't really the color you associate with multicolored control necessarily. Next is Puka's Eye. So this card I think is just really cool as well. It's 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters, draw a card, then choose a color. This artifact becomes the chosen color. So you like play this cup for 2 mana, you choose like white, and like now you just have a white permanent in play. So if you're playing, and then it says 3 tap, draw a card, activate only if there are 5 colors among permanents you control. So the thing I like about this card is that it's really weak on its own. Like you wouldn't just play a 2 mana artifact that enters and just is sitting there as like a certain color. But if you're playing a deck that's trying to get to all 5 colors, or you have a bunch of these vivid cards, this is a card that you like kind of want in your deck, because it makes all the vivid cards you have better. So if you have like 4 vivid cards in your deck, all of a sudden Puka's Eye could be like getting you an extra 1/1 from the card we just looked at. It could be like drawing an extra card, dealing an extra damage with your like other effects that have these like caring about having the colors in play, and it can be like a really low cost way to start developing towards your late game strategy on turn 2 and not have to necessarily mess up your mana base. It is one of those cards that I think is really neat to think about for your late game multicolor decks. Other decks aren't going to be interested in it, and I do kind of like these synergy pieces that you can maybe see early in a pack and be like, if this card wheels, this strategy's probably open. If somebody else is taking it, maybe it's not going to be as open, and I'm fighting for the multicolor deck with somebody else. But I think that it's kind of neat that the card's only really good enough if you're trying to get to 5 colors among permanents, and if you're like in another deck, you're not going to really want it. And I think that these sorts of cards are kind of cool as a low cost way to enable like a sweet strategy. Next is Tenefel Rhyme Speaker. So it's 3 and a blue for a 2/4 elemental wizard. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card. So the thing about this card is it comes out on turn 4. Your opponent generally will have at least a window to react to this before you're able to cast another 4 mana spell. But the reason I like this is in the past, we've seen this sort of effect on like a 3-drop creature. We saw that in the past. And like when you go 3-drop and then you play a 4-drop the next turn, it really curves very organically. And it's not like you're really paying a cost. You're curving out, which is something you already want to do. And you kind of are getting like reasonable stats along the curve. This one, you play a 4 mana 2/4, which kind of is a little bit of a liability potentially. It's not the best stat. You can get like 4 mana 4/4s or even bigger. And I think that playing this on turn 4 and then like having to deal like having like you fall behind a little bit when you play this, and then you start catching up by casting these expensive spells and drawing cards. I think that's much more interesting design space than having this be like a 2 mana 0/1 or something like that you can like fit into your curve before you want to start playing the 4 mana spells. I do also think this is a really cool piece of design for a set that has Convoke, because the Convoke spells do have mana value 4 or greater, but if you're tapping your creatures to help pay for the Convoke cost, that's how Convoke works. You can tap your creatures to help pay for your Convoke spells. all of a sudden you're casting like a 6-drop, but you're only spending like 3 actual mana if you're tapping 3 creatures to help pay for it. So you're getting that like extra upside of being able to cast expensive spells, but they don't actually cost you tons of mana. So maybe you can even double spell instead of just doing like 1 Haymaker spell a turn. I think it's a cool card to see in this sort of format with Convoke, with maybe an incentive to play some expensive spells. And also just, I think like having this thing cost 4 mana itself, like kind of puts you into a game state that's kind of makes more sense to me as someone who's like thinking about playing these things, where it's like if you get to develop this card before you're playing the 4 mana spell you were already trying to play, like it's less interesting to me than a card that puts you behind a little bit by being a little bit understated and then starts recouping card advantage to help you kind of equalize because you've fallen behind a little. I think that's kind of a little bit better of a design space. And then the final card is Wretched Wretch. I think hilarious like name. I think it's 2 and a black for a 4/2 goblin. When this creature dies, if it had a -1/-1 counter on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control and it loses all abilities. So with the blight mechanic in this set where you're putting -1/-1 counters on your creatures, we've already seen a couple of ways in this video of cards that kind of use those -1/-1 counters and then get a different effect out of them. So you kind of want to put those counters on them. Wretched Wretch is really cool for that as well, because you kind of want to get exactly 1 counter on this, because then it's a 3/1 creature and it's going to maybe trade off with something in combat and you get to like then get back a 4/2 creature. So it's like a 3/1 that dies into a 4/2 then, if you can get exactly 1 counter on it. If you never get a counter on it, it's a 3 mana 4/2, which isn't a great card these days. And if you do end up in a scenario where you have like a card that has Blight 2 or something and you like immediately kill off your Wretched Wretch, it comes back as a 4/2, that's also like totally like, it's a fine use of the card. You basically got spotted one of your like Blight 2s, which is a generally higher number of Blight, but so you're probably getting a reasonable effect from doing a Blight 2, but you didn't really get to like trade off your Wretched Wretch for another creature in combat or something like that. So I think it's really cool to have a card where it's like, I want to get exactly 1 -1/-1 counter onto this card. I think there's plenty of ways to do that, which means that in some decks, this is going to be a card you're pretty happy having. You might take it even early in packs 2 or 3 when you have some ways to Blight 1 already, or maybe even if you expect to get a bunch of Blight 1 cards that you're prioritizing, maybe even a little bit in pack 1s and 2. But I just love turning downsides into upsides. I think that makes for really interesting gameplay, really interesting design space, and I think Wretched Wretch is a great example of that sort of card. That's going to do it for today, though. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you next time.